There's something about Absolute Wonder Woman that I don't think enough people are talking about. We're not going to talk about the artwork or the mythology or the redesign, but rather we're going to talk about the central premise of Absolute Wonder Woman and what that represents for Wonder Woman as a character who stands for love and justice in a world where that never occurred, and why Wonder Woman still represents love and compassion and hope despite growing up with the odds stacked against her. Let me give you the origin because it reframes everything. In the Absolute Universe, Diana was born on Themyscira just like we know her, but as an infant, Zeus stripped her of her people as punishment for the Amazons defying the gods. The word Amazon was literally outlawed. No mortal or god could speak it, and Zeus went as far as to forbid the knowledge of her heritage from reaching her, ensuring that she would grow up without one identity that might explain the fire she felt inside of her. However, on Zeus's orders, Apollo delivered the infant Diana to the wild isles of Hell, a barren, scorched prison island where the sorceress Circe had been imprisoned for her own offenses against the divine order. Apollo gave Circe one instruction: be her warden. He gave her no instruction to keep Diana alive. Circe's initial plan was simple. She left the baby on a rock and waited for the island creatures to finish the job. However, Hell is not a hospitable place, and it was not meant to nurture anything. It was specifically designed to break what enters it. But then something remarkable happens. A serpent moved towards the exposed infant's jaws open, ready to strike, and baby Diana grabbed it mid-strike and threw it across the island. Circe was intrigued, and intrigue became eventual curiosity. And that curiosity slowly and inevitably became love, because as the series makes explicit, how you fall in love with a child is by raising it. What Thompson has constructed here is something closer to a philosophical thought experiment than a traditional origin story. She has removed every environmental advantage we typically assign to Wonder Woman's heroism and replaced them with their opposite. No paradise, no sisterhood, no loving mother waiting for guidance, no culture of honor and nobility passed down through generations. There's only hell and one reluctant witch and an infant girl who, from her first moment of life, responded to a threat not with fear, but with overwhelming physical confidence, and as the series later shows us, with kindness towards the very beast that came to destroy her. The beast that came to kill Diana eventually would become her friends, and over the years, her and Circe's corner of hell filled with creatures that had tried to prey on her and instead became her companions. Hell became a home, not because the environment softened, because Wonder Woman didn't. This is the experiment. Strip everything away, put the most realistic soul possible onto the most hostile possible condition, and what survived? According to Kelly Thompson, everything that matters survives. For decades, psychologists debate whether empathy and compassion were traits we were born with or behaviors we developed throughout our environment. The nature versus nurture question applied to our capacity to care for one another, and the research is now pointing towards an answer that is more layered than what either camp initially expected. Research shows that the brain circuit's responsibility for empathy exists in us from birth, but the research also shows how robustly those systems develop depending specifically on our environment and experience. Developmental psychologist Alison Grupnick found that infants as young as 18 months will attempt to comfort a distressed adult, offering a toy or a pat on the arm without being prompted. The root of compassion are present extraordinarily early in human development. But here's where it gets a little complicated. Dr. Bruce Perry's research on childhood trauma revealed that adverse experiences can fundamentally alter those compassionate brain circuits. Children raised in environments of neglect, abuse, or chronic stress show measurable changes in the regions responsible for empathy and emotional regulation. Their brains, essentially adapting to survive, begin to prioritize self-protection over concern for others. By every metric that psychology gives us, Diana's upbringing should have produced a survivor, not a hero. Hell is not an emotionally responsive environment. The wild isles was barren and hostile, and the creatures that had populated it wanted to hurt her. The gods who put her there did not care whether she lived or died. Every variable that research associates with the suppression of empathy was present in Diana's early life. And yet, Diana's first instinct upon encountering dangerous creatures was not to destroy them, it was to extend kindness. Her compassion did not erode under the pressures of hell. It appeared to be operating independently of those pressures altogether. This is where Thompson is making an argument that transcends the nature versus nurture debate as it's usually framed. She's suggesting that for Diana, compassion is not just a trait that develops well or was nurtured carefully. It was something deeper, something constitutive, something that defines who Diana is at the level that environment cannot simply reach. The series reinforces this point structurally. Thompson uses Aphrodite to reveal much later in the run that the goddesses each infused Diana with pieces of themselves and their powers when she was born. Aphrodite gave Diana a small portion of her own ability to inspire love in those who encountered her. Not enough to be overwhelming, not a weapon, but enough to ensure that those who might love her always had a foot in the door. Anyone who looked at Diana and felt the pull of connection, it was in a small way being nudged towards something the universe had decided Diana deserved. But here's the tragedy layered inside of that gift. Because Diana is so deeply empathic, because she feels so acutely the connections she makes with people, she has to spend her entire life wondering whether the love she receives is genuine or whether it is the goddess's magic doing the work for her. The most empathic woman in the room can never fully trust her own relationships. That's not a superpower, that would be considered a wound. Circe is also an interesting character because her arc in the series is one of the most psychologically sophisticated things DC has published in years. Circe in the main DC continuity is a villain. She is manipulative, ancient, and frequently cruel. She transforms men into animals, she schemes. She's defined by her hostility towards Diana and the Amazons as a whole. In Absolute Wonder Woman, Thompson did something genuinely bold. She takes Circe's villainy and subjects it to Diana's presence and watches what happens. And what happens is a complete transformation, not because Diana demanded, not because she manipulated or guilted Circe into changing, but because Diana's default mode of relating to a world is to love it, and love, as Thompson frames it, is contagious under the right conditions. And interesting enough, the development researchers support this. Studies on attachment theory demonstrate that the experience of being genuinely loved by even one consistent caregiver can buffer children against the most extreme environmental stressors. Mary Ainsworth Foundation work on attachment showed that secure attachment, the knowledge that you are loved and will not be abandoned, is the most reliable predictor of a child's ability to develop healthy empathy and emotional regulation. Diana couldn't provide Circe with a traditional mother-child attachment, but she gave Circe something imprisoned sorcerers have never been given before. She gave her someone to love. And the science says that the act of loving in itself is transformative. Caregiving changes the caregiver. Circe says it herself, how you fall in love with a child is by raising it. She did not decide to love Diana, she raised Diana and love arrived as consequences of that action. This is attachment science rendered as mythology. What Thompson is tracing here is something researchers call bidirectional influence in developmental psychology. The child shapes the caregiver just as the caregiver shapes the child. Diana's innate compassion, her refusal to be diminished by the hostilities of her environment, her instinct to befriend rather than fear, these qualities reached into the worst version of Circe and pulled something better out of her. Hell softened, not because the realm changed, but because Diana was in it. That is the thesis made visible. I want to bring in a different framework here because I think it illustrates something specific about Diana's psychology that the pure empathy science does not fully capture. In my Magneto video, I mentioned Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl was an Australian psychologist who survived 3 years in a SS concentration camp, including Auschwitz and Dachau. He lost his pregnant wife, his parents, and his brother to the Holocaust, and he was stripped systematically and deliberately of every external thing that psychologists point to a foundation of mental health and emotional resilience. And from inside that experience, he developed one of the most important psychological frameworks of the 20th century, logotherapy. Frankl's central argument is that the primary human drive is not the pursuit of pleasure, but rather the primary human drive is the search for meaning. And meaning, Frankl insisted, is available under all circumstances, even unavoidable suffering, especially unavoidable suffering. He developed the concept of what he called tragic optimism, which he defined as the ability to remain hopeful in spite of what he called the triad: pain, guilt, and death. Frankl observed in the camps that the people most likely to survive psychologically, most likely to retain their humanity and their identity, were not necessarily the strongest or the most physically resilient. They were people who had a reason to keep going, a future meaning to fulfill, a person they could not abandon, and a purpose that they had not yet complete. Diana of the Wild Isles is one of the clearest fictional embodiments of Frankl's tragic optimism that I have ever encountered in comics. She lives in pain. Her origin is built on loss. She's taken from her people before she knew them. She grew up surrounded by creatures of destruction. The gods who should have protected her were her captors, and yet Diana never collapsed into nihilism. She never decided that because her world is ugly, beauty is a lie. She never concludes that because the universe treated her cruelly, cruelty is the appropriate response to the universe. She builds meaning inside of hell. She names the creatures that came to kill her and makes them her companion. She turns a barren prison island into something that functions like home. When Steve Trevor washes ashore, she decides he doesn't belong in that place. She doesn't ask the gods for permission to help him. She sacrifices her own arm to perform the spell to send him back to the mortal world because she decided that his freedom matters more than her physical wholeness. That is not an action of someone who has been broken by her environment. That is the action of someone who found meaning so deep and so fundamental that adversity cannot reach it. Frankl wrote that between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space lies our power to choose our response. Diana has been living in that space her entire life. Hell is the stimulus. Diana's radical, persistent, almost irrational love is the response she chooses every single time. I want to step back for a moment and acknowledge the lineage here because Thompson did something that not a lot of writers do, and it wasn't technically reinventing Diana's core psychology from scratch. She's rather honoring a specific philosophical foundation that goes all the way back to 1941. William Moulton Marston created Wonder Woman with a deliberate psychological agenda. He was a Harvard-educated psychologist who believed that love and compassion were not just moral virtues, but the most powerful forces available to human civilization. In a 1943 essay in The American Scholar, Marston argued that the world needed a hero whose primary weapons were not violence or intellect, but rather love. In a 1943 essay in The American Scholar, Marston argued that the world needed a hero whose primary weapon was not violence or intellect, but love freely given. He wanted to create a hero who resolved conflict not through dominion, but through genuine connection. Marston's psychological work emphasized what he called emotional submission to loving authority, which is a phrase that sounds strange to modern ears, but carries a specific meaning. The idea that people grow and transform when they encounter love powerful enough to make them want to do better. Not coerced, not dominated, but rather transformed. Diana does not defeat her enemies by crushing them. She defeats them by showing them a version of the world where love is the organizing principle and making that version compelling enough that they cannot unsee it. The psychological research on post-traumatic growth, which is the study of a person or people who not only survive adversity but emerge from it with expanded capacity for meaning and connection, identifies several factors that predict whether someone grows or collapses after trauma. One of the most consistent predictors is what researchers call meaning-making capacity, the ability to integrate a traumatic experience into a revised understanding of a world that still allows for hope and purpose. Diana never pretends hell is not hell. She carries her origin honestly. She knows that she was taken from her people. She knows that the gods who placed her on the Wild Isle did not do so out of love. She knows that the world that she's now entering as the series progressed through Gateway City and other broader absolute universes is not a world that has earned her compassion. It is a world that Darkseid shaped to favor darkness. It is a world where heroes are designed to lose. And yet she brings her compassion anyway. She builds the Herion, a refuge, because she believes people deserve a safe place. She goes into mazes to free trapped creatures because she couldn't walk past a cage and pretend it's not there. She urges Batman to go find Superman not because she has been convinced that teamwork is tactically optimal, but because she generally believes that people are better together than they are alone. Thompson made a specific creative choice in the series construction that I think is worth naming explicitly. She gave Diana a lightning creature made of dark energy that manifests as a price of her magic, essentially a physical embodiment of the cost of her power. Diana is told that her death is the solution and her allies have to talk her out of it, not because Diana wants to off herself, but because Diana has made a calculation that her own life is worth less than everyone around her. That is not heroic selflessness, that is a traumatic response masquerading as nobility, and the series calls it out, because genuine hope is not self-erasure. Genuine compassion does not require the compassionate person to destroy in the process of extending it. One of the most important psychological distinctions in resilient research is between self-sacrifice, which can be healthy and noble, and self-annihilation, which is what happens when someone has internalized the belief that their own worth is conditional on their usefulness to others. Diana in that arc was edging toward annihilation. In her community, the people she had gathered through her relentless insistence on connection pulled her back. That is the other side of the empathy argument. Diana's capacity to love does not make her invulnerable, it makes her human, it makes her legible, and it means that the people who love her in return become the thing that saves her when her own hope momentarily fails. Here's the thing about Absolute Wonder Woman that I keep coming back to. Kelly Thompson didn't just write a story about a hero who overcame hell. She wrote a story about a hero who refused to let hell define the terms. There's a difference. Overcoming your environment implies that the environment had authority over you and that you eventually won. Diana never granted hell that authority. She didn't overcome the Wild Isles, she simply continued to be herself inside of it, and by being herself, she changed it. Circe softened, the beasts became companions, a prison became a home. The psychological science behind this is called active coping, the difference between trying to change the stressors and trying to change your relationship with it. But what Thompson is showing is something that goes beyond the coping mechanisms. Diana's not coping, she's demonstrating issue after issue that the deepest parts of who a person is are not accessible to the worst things that the world throws at them. Absolute Wonder Woman takes all of that and renders it in sequential art. Diana of Themyscira, last of the Amazons, the daughter of Circe, princess of hell, witch of the Wild Isle. She was raised in the worst place imaginable, and she became the best version of what a hero can be, despite hell, independent of it. And I think that's one of the most important things a story can say right now. If you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching. I'm going to continue to do these psychological examinations of different characters and heroes from Marvel and DC, so if you don't mind sticking along, be sure to hit that like button, comment, subscribe, and let me know what you think about Absolute Wonder Woman and what other Absolute character you would want me to examine next, or what other Marvel character you would want me to examine next. Thank you for watching. I'm Anderson, and I'm out. Bye.